He thought blocking a seat was power. He thought humiliating an elderly woman made him untouchable. And he thought Keanu Reeves was just another quiet stranger on the bus. But 1 minute later, the entire bus went silent, and the man who mocked everyone was suddenly begging. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The late morning sun rested comfortably above the city. Not harsh, not dramatic, just bright enough to soften the edges of everything it touched. Traffic moved in a steady rhythm, engines humming low footsteps, tapping against concrete, the familiar soundtrack of a weekday that promised nothing unusual. At the bus stop, people stood in loose clusters, each locked into their own private world. Some stared at their phones, some scanned the road impatiently. Others simply waited, eyes unfocused, minds elsewhere. Among them stood Keanu Reeves. He did not look like someone the world would stop for. He wore a dark jacket that had been broken in by years of use, the fabric creased naturally at the elbows. His boots were scuffed, not neglected, but trusted. There were no sunglasses hiding his eyes, no assistant hovering nearby, no hint that he was anyone other than another man catching a bus. He stood with relaxed posture, hands loosely at his sides, breathing slow and even, as if time moved at his pace, not the other way around. No one recognized him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The bus arrived with a soft hiss of air and brakes, the doors folding open as people stepped forward in practiced routine. Keanu boarded without hurry, tapping his ticket against the scanner. A quiet beep acknowledged him, no different from the dozens before or after. He moved down the aisle and chose a window seat about halfway back, placing himself where he could see without being seen. The bus interior was familiar in every way. Seats upholstered in faded fabric, metal poles polished dull by countless hands, glass windows marked with faint streaks from hurried cleanings. The smell was a mix of warm air cleaning solution and the lingering traces of morning commuters. A recorded voice announced the route in a flat, steady tone that blended into the low murmur of passengers settling in. Keanu sat still, one arm resting lightly on the seat beside him, his gaze drifting without urgency. He did not scan faces looking for recognition. He watched movement, behavior, small telling details. Across the aisle, a man in a button-down shirt leaned forward over his phone, thumbs scrolling fast, jaw-tight shoulders, tense the quiet pressure of deadlines etched into his posture. A few rows ahead, a young mother balanced grocery bags at her feet, while her child swung their legs, shoes knocking softly against the seat frame. Near the back, a student wore oversized headphones, music loud enough to leak faintly into the air, his head bobbing in time with a rhythm only he could fully hear. No one spoke to Keanu. No one looked twice. He preferred it that way. The bus pulled away from the curb, rolling smoothly into traffic. The city slid past the windows in fragments, storefronts, crosswalks, a cafe with chairs stacked outside, a billboard peeling at the edges revealing an older advertisement beneath. Ordinary scenes easily ignored, yet full of quiet stories if someone cared to notice. Keanu noticed. He had learned long ago that the world revealed itself in moments most people rushed past, in how someone waited, in how they listened, in how they treated strangers when no reward was promised. Strength, he believed, was not loud. It did not announce itself. It waited. As the bus continued forward, nothing felt urgent, nothing felt tense. It was just another ride on another morning filled with people who assumed it would end the same way it always did. They did not know that something small, almost invisible, was already beginning to form. Not an event, not a spectacle, just a choice that had not yet been made. And Keanu sat quietly watching, unaware to everyone else but fully present, as the ordinary morning carried them all toward a moment that would soon change everything. The bus moved deeper into the city, stopping and starting with a rhythm so familiar that most passengers barely noticed it. Each stop brought new faces, new fragments of lives folding briefly into the shared space before settling again. A woman stepped on holding a paper coffee cup, the lid already stained from a rushed sip. A courier climbed aboard next, one hand pressed to an earpiece, as he murmured updates to someone on the other end of the line. The doors closed, the bus exhaled and continued. Keanu remained still, his gaze calm, attentive, without being intrusive. He did not stare yet nothing escaped his awareness. He noticed the way the office worker's leg bounced faster every time his phone buzzed. He noticed the child grow restless, the soft hum of impatience beneath small movements. He noticed how the student adjusted his headphones slightly higher when someone nearby coughed, retreating further into his private soundscape. To most people, these were meaningless details. To Keanu, they were reminders of how fragile balance could be, how close everyone always was to disruption, even on a morning that felt predictable. The bus turned onto a wider avenue, sunlight pouring through the windows at a different angle, now warming the aisle. Dust motes floated briefly in the air before settling again. A faint rattle came from the ceiling panel near the back, the sound repeating each time the bus hit a seam in the road. Good. No one complained. It was simply part of the ride. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his posture not from discomfort, but from habit. He rested his boots flat on the floor, grounded. His expression remained neutral, thoughtful. He had learned over years of moving through the world that being calm did not mean being unaware. It meant being ready without needing to prove it. A minor disagreement flared near the front when a passenger muttered about someone blocking the aisle with a backpack. It faded as quickly as it appeared, resolved not by confrontation, but by quiet repositioning. Life on public transport often worked that way. Small tensions dissolved before becoming something larger. Most people relied on that pattern. They assumed problems would solve themselves if ignored long enough. Keanu knew better. He had seen how easily silence could turn into permission. How moments passed unchallenged often became habits. How habits left unchecked shaped the kind of world people accepted. The bus slowed again, approaching another stop. Keanu glanced briefly toward the front, then back to the window. Outside, a row of trees lined the sidewalk, their leaves barely moving in the light breeze. A man walked, his dog phone pressed to his ear, laughing at something unseen. A cyclist waited at the lightfoot on the curb, eyes forward. Everything looked normal. Inside the bus, the air felt steady, untroubled. The passengers sat in their places, wrapped in their own concerns. No one expected anything more from this ride than arrival. Keanu leaned back slightly, his reflection faintly visible in the window beside him, distorted by passing light and shadow. He did not know the names of the people around him. He did not need to. What mattered was how they would act when tested, and whether anyone would choose to notice when that test arrived. For now, there was nothing to do but wait. The bus rolled forward, carrying them all together, unaware that the ordinary calm of the morning was fragile, and that before long, one small moment would demand an answer from everyone aboard. Keanu rested his hands loosely on his lap, fingers relaxed, breathing steady. He was not thinking about the destination yet. He rarely did. He believed that how a journey unfolded often mattered more than where it ended. The bus continued its route, tires humming softly against the road, each stop blending into the next. A recorded voice announced the upcoming streets, flat and emotionless. The student's music pulsed faintly through his headphones. The child's shoes brushed the seat again, earning a gentle correction from the mother. Life continued in small, repetitive motions, the kind that lulled people into assuming nothing would interrupt their routine. Keanu looked out the window once more. His eyes reflected a quiet patience, the kind shaped by years of choosing stillness over reaction. He had learned that moments rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as inconveniences, as discomfort, as choices others hope to avoid. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop. The doors prepared to open. A few passengers shifted, ready to stand or make room. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing felt urgent. And yet something subtle changed in the air, a barely noticeable pause, as if the ordinary morning hesitated for just a breath. Keanu's gaze lifted from the window toward the aisle. The next moment had not happened yet, but it was close. The bus continued forward, easing into traffic, as if nothing in the world required urgency. The city unfolded outside the windows in long, unbroken lines of concrete and glass. Keanu remained seated, posture relaxed, his presence still blending into the background of ordinary lives moving alongside his own. After a few moments, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. The movement was small, careful, almost private. He drew out a folded piece of paper and held it loosely in one hand, not opening it right away. His thumb brushed along the crease, as if confirming something real, something already decided. He did not look around to see if anyone noticed. No one did. When he unfolded it, he did so only enough to see the top portion. The paper was heavier than a flyer, clean and well kept. The lettering was formal, printed with intention rather than urgency. A name appeared near the top, his name written without decoration, without flourish. Beneath it, a date. Today. A location listed simply as a community center, several stops ahead. There was no rush in his expression, no tension, just quiet acknowledgement. Keanu glanced at his watch. He was early, more than early enough. He could have waited longer before leaving. He could have driven. He could have arrived just on time. But he had chosen this instead. The bus, the waiting, the unhurried pace. That choice was deliberate. He folded the invitation again and returned it to his pocket, settling back into his seat as the bus slowed for another stop. The doors opened. A few passengers boarded. An older man with a canvas bag, a woman carrying a bouquet of flowers wrapped in brown paper. Their paths crossed briefly, then separated, each returning to their own space. The bus pulled away once more. Keanu watched the reflection of the city ripple across the glass. Buildings stretched and bent with motion. Faces appeared briefly in passing cars, then vanished. Everything felt transient, temporary. And yet he knew some moments lingered far longer than others. He did not know exactly how this ride would unfold. He rarely did. But he understood that days like this often held meaning beyond what could be planned. Meaning arrived quietly. It did not announce itself with noise or spectacle. It appeared through delay, through inconvenience, through the unexpected presence of other people. The bus rolled through a stretch of road, shaded by trees. Sunlight breaking through the leaves in scattered patterns that drifted across the aisle. The student with the headphones shifted again. The office worker sighed, rubbing his eyes. The young mother adjusted her bags at her feet. Life continued unaware of itself. Keanu remained still, his gaze thoughtful now, not fixed on any one thing but open to everything around him. The invitation rested hidden against his chest, close enough to feel if he focused on it. He did not. He believed that arriving early was a form of respect, not just for time, but for people, for moments that deserved to unfold without pressure. The bus slowed again, approaching the next stop, carrying him closer to where he was meant to be. And yet something in him understood that the reason he had allowed himself extra time was not simply for the event waiting ahead. It was for whatever might happen before he arrived. The bus came to another stop, brakes sighing as the doors opened once more. A few passengers stepped off, replaced almost immediately by others climbing aboard, their movements practiced and unremarkable. A man with paint on his sleeves took a seat near the back. A young woman carrying a tote bag scanned for an open space before standing near the pole. The flow continued steady and predictable. Keanu remained where he was. He adjusted his position slightly, resting his shoulder more comfortably against the seat. His eyes drifted back to the window, following the familiar rhythm of the street as it passed by. Crosswalks flashed white and disappeared. Store signs blurred together. A bakery released a warm glow from inside. People gathered near the counter, unaware they were being observed for only a second before the bus moved on. The invitation stayed folded in his jacket pocket, its presence quiet but constant. It did not demand attention. It did not need to. Keanu already knew why he was going. The reason was not tied to cameras or applause or recognition. It never was. What mattered was showing up, being present, standing where he said he would stand even if no one noticed. He glanced at his watch again, not out of impatience but reassurance. Still early. Enough time for the bus to run late. Enough time for the unexpected. He allowed a faint breath to leave him slow and controlled the way he always breathed when he wanted to stay grounded. The bus moved through an intersection and turned onto a narrower street. The ride became slightly less smooth here, tires humming over uneven pavement. The ceiling panel rattled again. No one complained. Everyone accepted it as part of the journey. Keanu watched the passengers instead of the road now. He noticed how people avoided eye contact without realizing they were doing it, how silence often felt safer than involvement, how the smallest inconvenience could pull frustration to the surface if given the chance. He had learned over years of walking through the world quietly that patience revealed character. It showed who people were when nothing forced them to perform, who they were when no one was watching closely. Another stop approached. The bus slowed. This time, no one exited. A single passenger boarded, pausing briefly to let the doors close behind him. The driver nodded without looking back. The bus continued. Keanu rested his hand against the side of his jacket, for a moment feeling the folded paper beneath the fabric. Not opening it, not checking it again, just acknowledging it. The event would happen whether he rushed or not. The timing was already set. What was not set was everything that could happen between now and then. He understood that life rarely waited for convenience. Moments arrived when they wanted to, often disguised as small disruptions, a delay, a stranger, a situation others hoped would resolve itself without their involvement. The bus carried on its interior calm. Its passengers settled back into routine. No raised voices, no tension, just the quiet assumption that the ride would remain uneventful. Keanu looked forward again, his gaze steady, his expression unchanged. He had chosen this ride not because it was efficient, but because it allowed space for things to unfold. And as the bus moved deeper into the city, he remained quietly aware that sometimes the most important moments appear when nothing seems about to happen at all. Keanu shifted his gaze once more toward the aisle as the bus slowed again. The doors opened, letting in a brief wash of outside noise before sealing it away. A couple stepped on, talking softly. An older man followed, moving carefully, gripping the rail with both hands. The bus accepted them all without pause and moved on. Time felt generous. That was intentional. Keanu had learned long ago that when time felt rushed, people made careless choices. When time slowed, truth surfaced. He did not hurry moments. He let them reveal themselves. He rested his back against the seat and allowed his eyes to soften. The invitation remained untouched, folded neatly where it belonged. Whatever waited for him at the community center would still be there. What mattered was how he arrived, not how fast. Outside, the city shifted again. The buildings grew closer together. Side streets branched away, each carrying lives that would never intersect with his. A delivery truck idled at the curb. A woman crossed the street holding a box too large for her arms. Someone laughed from an open doorway. Inside the bus, nothing had changed. The student's music pulsed faintly. The office worker rubbed his temples. The child leaned against the window, watching the world blur past. Everyone remained wrapped in their own concerns, trusting the ride to stay ordinary. Keanu knew better than to trust that. He had seen how easily an ordinary moment could demand something unexpected, how silence could be tested, how choices once avoided returned heavier than before. He did not seek those moments, but he did not turn away from them either. The bus approached another stop. The driver slowed. A small pause settled over the aisle, barely noticeable, but real. Keanu's attention sharpened, calm but alert. Whatever came next. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop, the familiar sigh of brakes filling the space, just before the doors opened. Outside, the sidewalk was quieter here, less crowded than the earlier stops. A few people waited spaced apart, shadows stretching lightly behind them in the late morning sun. One of them was an elderly woman. She stood a step back from the curb, holding two grocery bags that looked heavier than she wanted them to be. The paper handles were twisted tight around her fingers, her grip careful and controlled. She did not lean on anyone. She did not ask for help. She waited patiently, posture straight, chin lifted, just enough to suggest dignity rather than pride. When the doors opened, she moved forward slowly. Each step was deliberate, not hesitant but measured, as if she had learned long ago that rushing only made things harder. She climbed the first step, then the next, pausing briefly to steady herself before continuing. Her breathing was slightly louder now, not labored but noticeable to anyone paying attention. Most people were not. A few passengers glanced up, then looked away almost immediately. A man near the front shifted his feet to give her space, but did not offer his seat. A woman farther back adjusted her bag on her lap, eyes fixed on the window. The student with the headphones barely registered her presence at all. The bus accepted her the same way it accepted everyone else, without comment, without concern. Keanu noticed her the moment she stepped inside. His gaze lifted not suddenly, but with intention. He saw the small details others missed, the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her arms tightened slightly as the bus rocked under her weight, the careful way she balanced the bags so they would not swing and throw her off center. He did not see weakness. He saw effort. She moved past the front seats, scanning quietly for an open place. Her eyes did not beg. They searched. She did not expect the world to rearrange itself for her. She only hoped there might be room. The bus pulled away from the curb, the motion forcing her to reach for the nearest pole. Her hand wrapped around the metal fingers, pressing firmly, knuckles paling just a bit. One of the grocery bags brushed against her leg, and she adjusted it with a small shift of her wrist. Still, she said nothing. The air inside the bus changed, though few would have named it. A subtle discomfort spread, the kind that made people aware of themselves without knowing why. The unspoken question hovered: should someone stand? Should someone help? No one moved. Keanu remained seated, but his attention was fully with her now. Not in judgment, not in urgency, in recognition. He understood that moments like this often revealed more about everyone watching than about the person standing. The woman took another step down the aisle, then another. Her pace was slow but steady. She passed Keanu's row, close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the calm determination in her expression. She smelled faintly of soap and paper, ordinary scents that spoke of routine, not fragility. She continued forward, still searching for a seat. There was no drama yet, no raised voices, no conflict, just a tired woman standing in a moving bus carrying more than groceries, and a group of strangers quietly deciding whether or not to notice. The bus rolled forward, tires humming softly as it merged back into traffic. The movement was gentle, but enough to require balance. The elderly woman tightened her grip on the pole, adjusting her stance so her feet were planted more firmly apart. Her shoulders lifted slightly with the effort, then settled again as she found her center. She continued down the aisle. Each step took intention, not because she was unsure, but because she understood her limits. She did not rush. She did not complain. She moved the way someone moves when they have learned over many years to measure their strength carefully and use it wisely. The grocery bags pulled at her arms now. One held canned goods that clinked softly with each sway of the bus. The other was filled with produce, the paper stretched tight along the edges. She shifted them slightly, redistributing the weight, careful not to lose balance. Passengers noticed in fragments. A man in a suit glanced up, then back to his phone, jaw tightening, as if the moment had inconvenienced him emotionally rather than physically. A woman near the window pressed her lips together, eyes following the woman for a second longer than necessary before turning away. Someone farther back cleared their throat, then did nothing else. The student with the headphones leaned farther into his seat volume, rising just enough to seal himself off from the aisle entirely. Keanu watched it all. He did not move. Not yet. He understood that action taken too early often robbed others of their chance to choose correctly. He observed the space between people, the silence where a simple gesture could have lived. He saw hesitation disguised as politeness, discomfort masked as distraction. The woman paused briefly beside an empty stretch of aisle, letting the bus steady itself before continuing. Her breathing had grown slightly heavier now, shallow but controlled. She did not look at anyone directly. She kept her gaze forward, as if asking nothing more than to pass through unnoticed. But passing unnoticed was becoming harder. The bus hit a shallow dip in the road, and the woman swayed just enough that the metal pole rang softly as her grip tightened. The sound carried farther than it should have, cutting through the quiet hum of the ride. A few heads turned again. Still no one stood. Keanu's eyes sharpened his posture, subtly shifting. He leaned forward just a fraction, boots pressing more firmly against the floor. He did not feel urgency yet, but awareness had deepened. This was no longer just observation. This was readiness. The woman took another step, then another. She was nearing the middle of the bus, now closer to where Keanu sat. As she passed him, their eyes met briefly. Hers were calm, steady, not embarrassed, not pleading. There was no expectation in them, only patience. Keanu met her gaze and gave a small, respectful nod. Nothing more. No promise, no assumption, just acknowledgement. She moved on, continuing her slow search for a seat, unaware of what waited just a few steps ahead. Unaware that the quiet discomfort she had carried onto the bus was about to expose something far louder than her own exhaustion. The bus kept moving, and with every passing second, the simple act of standing became a test no one had agreed to take, but one that could no longer be avoided. The elderly woman slowed near the center of the aisle, pausing not because she wanted to, but because the bus shifted again beneath her feet. She adjusted her stance, steadying herself before continuing. The grocery bags pressed deeper into her palms, now the paper handles biting slightly into her skin. She ignored it. Discomfort was familiar. She had learned how to carry it without complaint. Around her, the bus felt unusually quiet. Conversations had faded. Phones were still held, screens glowing, but fewer people were actually looking at them. The discomfort had become shared, though unspoken. Everyone knew she needed a seat. Everyone waited for someone else to act first. Keanu watched the pause closely. He saw the way her shoulders rose and fell more noticeably now. The way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, conserving energy. The way she avoided eye contact, not out of shame, but out of habit. She had learned not to expect anything from strangers. The bus rolled through another intersection, sunlight flashing across the aisle. The woman took another step forward, then another, her pace unchanged. She was almost past the midpoint now, almost close to the back. Ahead of her, one seat stood out. It was technically empty, but not available. A young man occupied the space beside it, his legs stretched wide, shoes planted squarely where someone else could have sat. His posture was relaxed, careless. Music pulsed loudly through his headphones, sealing him off from the rest of the bus. The woman stopped a few steps away. She did not speak yet. She waited, as if hoping the situation might correct itself without words. The bus swayed gently, and she tightened her grip on the pole once more. Keanu felt the shift fully now. This was no longer just an elderly woman boarding a bus. This was the moment where choice became unavoidable, where silence would mean something, where inaction would become its own decision. The woman looked at the blocked seat again, then at the floor, gathering herself. She took a breath, and prepared to ask. The seat was there, clearly visible, empty in every way that mattered, and yet it was not available. A young man occupied the space beside it, his body angled comfortably towards the aisle, legs stretched wide without hesitation. His sneakers were spotless, bright white, their soles planted squarely across the cushion, meant for someone else. Designer fabric hugged his jacket and pants, clean lines, expensive, stitching the kind of clothing that announced confidence without effort. Large headphones covered his ears, sealing him inside his own world. The music pulsed loudly enough that its rhythm bled into the bus, a dull, repetitive beat that refused to be ignored. He leaned back, shoulders relaxed, chin slightly lifted. He did not look around. He did not check his surroundings. He took up space as if it belonged to him by default. The elderly woman stopped a few steps away. She did not speak at first. She did not reach out. She simply waited. Her gaze rested briefly on the seat, then on the young man's shoes, then lowered again. She stood quietly beside the pole, giving him time to notice her on his own, time to correct what felt, at least to her, like an obvious oversight. She believed, perhaps out of habit, that courtesy still worked best when given the chance to appear naturally. The bus moved again. The sudden forward pull forced her to tighten her grip on the metal pole. Her fingers wrapped around it firmly, knuckles whitening as the grocery bags tugged downward at her arms. One bag shifted the paper, creasing under the weight. She adjusted it carefully, pulling it closer to her leg so it would not swing. Still, she said nothing. The music continued. The young man's heel bounced slightly in time with it, the movement casual, unbothered. He did not glance up. He did not sense the pause beside him or chose not to acknowledge it. Around them, the bus grew quieter. The office worker stopped scrolling. The young mother stilled her child's swinging legs with a gentle touch. A man near the aisle leaned back, watching, without fully committing his attention. No one spoke. No one moved. Keanu saw everything. He noticed the woman's fingers tightening around the pole, the slight tremor running through them that had nothing to do with the motion of the bus. He noticed the way her shoulders lifted subtly with each breath, now the effort beginning to show, despite her calm expression. He noticed how she kept her eyes lowered, not out of submission, but out of patience. He noticed the young man's posture too, the complete ease, the absence of awareness, the assumption that the space around him existed for his comfort alone. The silence stretched longer than it should have. The bus swayed gently as it took a turn, and the woman shifted her feet to maintain balance. One of the grocery bags brushed against the seat frame, producing a soft sound that seemed louder than it was. A few heads turned. The young man did not move. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, his attention fully engaged now. Not in anger, not in judgment, in clarity. This was the moment where small choices revealed their weight, where the difference between inconvenience and indifference became visible, where respect either appeared or did not. The woman remained standing beside the blocked seat, waiting, and the bus carried them forward, wrapped in a silence that was no longer comfortable, no longer neutral, and no longer accidental. The woman shifted her weight again, careful and precise, as if each movement had to be calculated before she allowed it. The bus rocked gently beneath her, the familiar sway that most passengers adjusted to without thinking. For her, it required focus. She tightened her grip on the pole, fingers pressing harder. Now the skin stretched thin over her knuckles. She waited. Seconds passed, then more. The young man remained exactly as he was, his head tilted slightly with the rhythm of his music, shoulders loose, jaw relaxed. The glow of his phone reflected faintly off the side of his face as he scrolled, thumb moving lazily. His shoes stayed planted across the seat, claiming it without question. To him, the space was already taken. End of thought. The silence around them deepened. A man a few rows back cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the stillness. No response followed. A woman near the window glanced toward the elderly woman again, then quickly away, as if the moment had become too personal to witness. The air inside the bus felt heavier now, not from heat but from restraint. Keanu noticed the change immediately. He saw how the bus had divided itself without anyone saying a word. Those who watched openly, those who pretended not to see, those who hoped the problem would dissolve if ignored long enough. He had seen this pattern before in different places with different faces. The setting changed, but the behavior rarely did. The woman's arms trembled faintly now, not dramatically, just enough to betray the strain. The grocery bags pulled lower, stretching the paper handles further. She adjusted her grip, careful not to let anything spill. Her breathing grew slightly more audible, shallow, but steady, controlled through habit rather than comfort. She still had not spoken. The bus hit a shallow bump in the road, just enough to jolt everyone forward a fraction. The woman's body swayed, and for a brief moment, her balance faltered. Her hand slid slightly along the pole before she caught herself again. The metal rang softly as her grip tightened. A quiet murmur rippled through the bus. Someone whispered under their breath. Another passenger shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The young man did not look up. Keanu felt the tension settle fully now, not as anger but as a clear understanding that the moment had crossed from awkward into unacceptable. He did not move yet. He watched. He waited. He allowed the situation to reveal itself completely. The woman finally lifted her gaze toward the young man's face, her eyes calm, steady, lined with years rather than fear. She seemed to take a breath, preparing herself, not to demand, not to accuse, just to ask. Before the words could leave her mouth, the bus slowed again, preparing for another stop. The sudden shift forced her to brace herself once more. She paused, steadying her stance, choosing balance over speech. Keanu saw the choice and felt something settle in his chest. This was not hesitation born of weakness. This was restraint born of dignity. The seat remained blocked. The music continued to pulse. The silence pressed in from all sides, and the moment that could no longer be avoided waited, suspended just a breath away. The bus eased forward again, and the elderly woman steadied herself with a quiet exhale. She stood inches from the blocked seat, now close enough to feel the vibration of the music through the cushion beneath the young man's shoes. The beat pulsed steadily, indifferent, filling the small space where courtesy should have lived. She waited one more moment, not because she expected a miracle, but because she had spent a lifetime giving people the benefit of time. Time to notice, time to remember, time to do the right thing without being asked. Her fingers tightened again around the pole. The grocery bags dragged lower, the weight finally making itself known in her shoulders and arms. A faint tremor ran through her hands, subtle but unmistakable. She adjusted her stance feet, angled carefully to keep her balance as the bus leaned into a turn. Around them, the silence had become heavy. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the students' music, though still audible, felt smaller now, swallowed by the tension pressing in from every side. People watched openly, at last, no longer pretending to be absorbed in their phones or the passing scenery. This was no longer just an uncomfortable moment. It was a test unfolding in plain sight. Keanu felt it fully. He saw the woman's jaw tighten slightly, not in anger, but in resolve. He saw the way she drew in a breath, preparing herself to speak despite the strain in her body. He saw how the young man remained sealed inside his comfort, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the space he was taking. The bus swayed again. The woman's grip slipped just a fraction before she corrected it, her body compensating quietly, refusing to ask for help she should not have needed to request. Keanu leaned forward, a little more boots firm against the floor. Now his attention narrowed, focused. This was no longer a passing discomfort. This was a moment that demanded a response. The woman lifted her head, eyes settling on the young man at last. She opened her mouth to speak, and the bus held its breath. The elderly woman finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost careful, shaped by years of choosing courtesy, even when it cost her something. "Excuse me," she said, the words gentle and unforced. "May I sit there, please?" The question was simple, reasonable, human. For a moment, nothing happened. The young man did not look up. He did not shift his legs. He did not pause his scrolling or turn his head. His music continued to pulse through his headphones, the beat steady and loud enough now that it felt intrusive, as if it were pushing back against the space around him. The woman waited, standing exactly where she was, eyes lowered again, hands tight around the pole. She gave him time to hear her, time to respond, time to do what most people would have done without being asked. Instead, the music grew slightly louder. The adjustment was small, but unmistakable. A subtle turn of the volume control, a deliberate choice. The beat pressed harder into the air, sealing him off, more completely shutting her out, as if her request were an inconvenience, rather than a plea for basic consideration. A ripple moved through the bus. The office worker frowned, his eyes lifting sharply from his phone. A woman near the aisle pressed her lips together, glancing between the young man and the elderly woman with visible discomfort. Someone whispered quietly to the person beside them, a brief comment that carried more frustration than volume. Still, no one spoke aloud. The woman remained standing. She did not sigh. She did not show irritation. She simply waited, as if hoping the moment might correct itself if given a little more grace. Keanu watched closely. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened just a bit more now, the way her fingers flexed against the pole, trying to ease the strain in her hands. He noticed how she shifted her weight again, careful, controlled, conserving energy. He also noticed the way the bus responded, not with action, but with avoidance. Eyes slid away, Heads turned back toward the windows. People adjusted their posture as if physical movement might substitute for moral courage. Everyone saw the wrongness of what was happening. Everyone hoped someone else would address it. The woman tried again. This time her voice was a little louder, not because she was angry, but because the bus was moving and the music was loud. "Young man," she said, still polite, still respectful. "May I please sit there?" The question hung in the air. The young man reacted at last. Slowly, lazily, he turned his head just enough to acknowledge her presence. One side of his headphones shifted slightly as he tilted, his head eyes flicking toward her for the briefest moment. His mouth curved into a smirk. It was not cruel in the obvious way. It was casual, dismissive, the kind of expression worn by someone who felt untouchable, someone who had never needed to explain himself to anyone he did not respect. He looked at her, then he looked away. His legs did not move. The music continued. A quiet tension spread through the bus, thicker now, heavier. The woman's face remained composed, but something deeper than fatigue passed through her eyes. Not surprise, not outrage, just a familiar disappointment, the kind that comes from realizing that politeness alone would not be enough. Keanu felt it settle in his chest. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a choice. And every person, watching himself included, had now been given the same one. The elderly woman stood quietly after the smirk, as if giving the moment one last chance to change its mind. She did not react to the expression. She did not comment on it. She simply waited, shoulders squared, dignity intact, though the strain in her body was becoming harder to hide. The bus rolled forward, and the motion forced her to tighten her grip again. The grocery bags tugged at her arms, the paper handles digging deeper into her fingers now. She adjusted them with care, moving one slightly closer to her leg, careful not to let anything spill. Her breathing was shallow but steady, measured in the way of someone who had learned to endure without complaint. Around her, reactions came in fragments. The office worker shook his head almost imperceptibly, jaw tightening as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself. A middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned toward her companion and whispered something under her breath, eyes flicking toward the young man with open disapproval. A teenager near the back glanced up from his phone, took in the scene, then looked away again, retreating into silence. No one spoke loudly enough to matter. The young man shifted slightly in his seat, settling in more comfortably. His posture relaxed to the point of arrogance. His heel bounced again in time with the music tapping against the cushion that remained denied to the woman standing beside him. He did not look back at her. To him, the interaction was already over. Keanu saw the moment for what it was. This was not ignorance. This was not distraction. This was entitlement, plain and unfiltered. The young man had heard her. He had chosen not to care. And in doing so, he had placed himself at the center of the bus without saying another word. Keanu also saw the others. He saw how quickly discomfort turned into avoidance, how easily people convinced themselves that staying quiet was the same as staying out of it. He felt the weight of that shared hesitation, the way silence spread when no one wanted to be the first to break it. The elderly woman shifted her feet again, repositioning carefully to keep her balance as the bus leaned into a turn. Her hand slid slightly along the pole before she corrected it, fingers tightening again. A faint tremor ran through her arms now, subtle but unmistakable. She still did not raise her voice. Her eyes lowered briefly, not in defeat, but in focus, as if she were deciding whether it was worth asking again, as if she were weighing the cost of dignity against the cost of standing. The bus slowed for another stop breaks, sighing. A few passengers boarded. They took in the scene instantly, the tension obvious even without context. A man paused, eyebrows lifting slightly, then chose a seat farther away. A woman hesitated near the aisle, then sat without comment. The doors closed. The bus moved on. The woman remained standing. Keanu leaned forward slightly now, his boots pressing more firmly into the floor. His posture subtly changed. He had not moved yet, but his attention had narrowed, sharpened, fully engaged. This was the space where restraint ended and responsibility began. Still he waited, Because sometimes the hardest truth to face is not the cruelty of one person, but the silence of many. The elderly woman lifted her head again, drawing in a careful breath. Her voice, when she spoke this time, was still gentle, but clearer, shaped by effort rather than insistence. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes steady now. "Could you please move your feet so I can sit?" The request was impossible to misunderstand. For a brief second, it felt as though the bus itself waited. The young man reacted slowly, deliberately. He turned his head just enough for her to see his face clearly now. His eyes moved over her without warmth, without urgency, without concern. One corner of his mouth curled upward, not into a smile, but into something close to amusement. He gave a small, almost theatrical shrug. Then he turned the volume up again. The music surged louder, the bass pressing into the air like a challenge. The gesture was unmistakable. He had heard her. He had chosen to dismiss her publicly, without words, without apology. A low murmur rippled through the bus. Someone whispered, "Unbelievable." Another passenger exhaled sharply through their nose. A woman near the front shook her head. Lips pressed tight, eyes fixed straight ahead as if watching made her complicit. The elderly woman did not speak again. She did not argue. She did not plead. She simply stood there, hands tightening around the pole, shoulders squared, absorbing the moment with a quiet strength that deserved far more than it was given. The smirk faded from the young man's face as he settled back, satisfied, his legs still stretched wide, his posture announcing that the matter was closed. Keanu felt the shift settle heavily now. This was no longer discomfort. This was humiliation carried out in silence, enabled by indifference. He saw it in the woman's stillness. He saw it in the eyes of the passengers who looked away too late. He saw it in the ease with which the young man reclaimed his isolation. No one had stepped forward. Not yet. The bus continued moving its rhythm, unchanged, carrying with it a moment that would not pass quietly, no matter how much everyone pretended it might. The silence did not last. A man sitting 2 rows behind the young man finally leaned forward, unable to hold it in any longer. He was middle-aged, dressed simply, the kind of person who usually kept his head down and his opinions to himself. His voice, when it came, was firm but not aggressive. "Hey," he said loud enough to carry. "Let her sit. She asked you politely." The words landed plainly, without insult, without challenge. Just a statement of what should have already happened. The young man reacted instantly. He pulled one ear cup away from his head and turned around in his seat, annoyance flashing across his face, as if he had been personally inconvenienced. "Why should I?" he said, his tone sharp and dismissive. "I paid full fare like everyone else." A few heads turned. The man who had spoken opened his mouth to reply, but the young man continued before he could. "This isn't a charity bus," he added, spreading his arms slightly as if addressing an audience. "I paid for my seat. Actually, I paid for my space. So I'll sit however I want." The words echoed through the bus louder than the music ever had. The elderly woman stood silently beside him, her gaze lowering toward the floor. Not in shame, not in defeat, in exhaustion. The kind that settles in when you realize explaining yourself would cost more energy than you have left. A woman across the aisle whispered something under her breath. Another passenger shifted in their seat, discomfort written clearly across their face. Still, no one else spoke. The young man noticed the attention and leaned into it. "You know what the problem is," he said, smirking now, voice growing more confident with every second of silence. "People think kindness is mandatory. It's not. That's a choice. And I don't owe anyone anything." He glanced briefly at the elderly woman, then away again, as if she were an object rather than a person. "If standing is such a problem," he added, shrugging, "maybe she should have planned better." The air inside the bus felt heavier with every word. Keanu remained seated. His posture did not change. His expression stayed calm, but his attention was absolute now. He watched the way the young man spoke, not just what he said. The casual cruelty, the comfort with being watched, the certainty that no real consequence would follow. The man who had spoken earlier shook his head slowly, lips pressed together, defeated. He leaned back into his seat, eyes forward, retreating from the moment he had briefly tried to claim. The young man scoffed, satisfied. He replaced his ear cup halfway, not fully sealing himself off, as if daring someone else to try. The elderly woman adjusted her grip on the pole, again fingers trembling slightly now. Her shoulders sagged just a fraction, the effort of standing no longer hidden. The bus rolled on, and in that moving silence something crossed a line. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Keanu sat still, watching, waiting, allowing the moment to reveal exactly who everyone was choosing to be. The young man straightened in his seat, sensing the attention settling on him like a spotlight. Instead of shrinking from it, he seemed to grow more comfortable. His confidence swelled in the space left behind by everyone else's silence. "I'm not trying to be rude," he said, though his tone carried no effort to soften the claim. "I'm just being honest." He tapped the side of his phone with one finger as if emphasizing a point only he could see. "I pay my way. I don't get discounts. I don't get special treatment. So why should I give up my seat just because someone else expects it?" The word "expects" landed sharply. A man near the window frowned openly now, but said nothing. A woman farther back shook her head, lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. The discomfort had become visible, yet it still stopped short of action. The young man leaned back, spreading his arms wider, legs still stretched across the empty seat. "This whole thing," he continued, "it's just people wanting favors. That's not how the world works." He laughed softly, a humorless sound. "You want something, you earn it." He glanced again at the elderly woman this time, with something closer to impatience. "No offense," he said, though the words carried none of the meaning. "But being old doesn't mean you get priority. We all have places to be." The woman lowered her eyes fully now. Not because she agreed, not because she accepted his reasoning, but because she was tired in a way that went beyond standing. Tired of explaining herself, tired of needing permission for dignity, tired of moments like this where decency became a debate. Her shoulders slumped just a fraction, a small surrender of energy rather than will. She shifted her weight again, careful, practiced her body, compensating quietly for what the situation demanded. The bus felt heavy. The young man mistook the silence for approval. "You know," he added, his voice dropping slightly, as if sharing something clever, "my dad always says, people who give in too easily end up losing everything." He smirked again. "That's why he's successful. He doesn't bend for anyone." A few passengers stiffened at that. Keanu heard it clearly now. The framing. Kindness as weakness, empathy as failure, age as inconvenience. He recognized the pattern immediately. He had seen it before in different forms, spoken by different mouths, always hiding behind the same confidence. Still, he did not move. He watched the elderly woman's breathing grow more controlled, more deliberate. He watched the way her hands trembled slightly, despite her effort to keep them still. He watched the way the bus seemed to hold its breath along with her. The young man rolled his shoulders, satisfied with himself. "So, yeah," he said, settling back fully now. "Not my problem." The words lingered longer than the sound of the music ever had. No one responded. The bus continued forward, unchanged in its route, unchanged in its motion, but altered completely in its atmosphere. Shame sat thick in the aisle, heavy and unspoken, pressing against everyone present. Keanu remained seated, silent, his restraint no longer passive, but intentional. He was still waiting, and the moment was not finished yet. The bus moved through another intersection, but the sense of motion felt distant now, as if everything inside had slowed while the world outside continued on without concern. The elderly woman remained standing, her gaze fixed downward, not on the floor itself, but on the effort it took to remain upright. Her breathing was measured now, in through the nose, out through the mouth, controlled, deliberate. She shifted her weight again, carefully redistributing it so one leg could rest while the other carried more of the strain. Years of experience had taught her how to do this without drawing attention, how to endure quietly. Around her, The silence grew uncomfortable in a way that could no longer be ignored. A man near the aisle opened his mouth, then closed it again. A woman 2 seats away folded her arms tightly, jaw clenched. Someone farther back muttered something under their breath, a word of disapproval that never quite found its way into the open. No one followed through. The young man noticed the tension and seemed to enjoy it. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees now, as if addressing an audience that had gathered just for him. "Look," he said, voice carrying easily, "this is how things work. You take care of yourself first. That's reality." He shook his head, smiling as if at a private joke. People get soft when they start thinking they owe everyone kindness. That's how you get taken advantage of. The elderly woman did not look up. Her eyes remained lowered, lashes resting against lined skin. Not in shame, not in agreement. In exhaustion that ran deeper than this moment. The kind of exhaustion that came from seeing the same argument repeated across years, dressed up in different words, always arriving at the same conclusion. The bus felt heavier now, as if the air itself had thickened. Even the music leaking from the young man's headphones seemed quieter, muffled by the weight of what had been said. Keanu remained seated. From the outside, it might have looked like indifference, like detachment. But his stillness was deliberate. He was watching not only the young man, but everyone else. Watching who leaned away, who looked down, who waited for someone else to carry the burden of action. He understood something many people missed. Moments like this were not decided by the loudest voice. They were decided by the silence that followed it. The elderly woman's grip on the pole tightened once more. A faint tremor passed through her hands. She steadied herself again, refusing to falter, refusing to ask for help that should never have required a request. The bus continued forward, and with every second that passed, the humiliation no longer belonged only to the woman standing. It belonged to everyone who saw it happen and chose to remain quiet. The bus hit the uneven stretch of road without warning. It was not a violent jolt, not the kind that sent people flying from their seats, but sharp enough to force every standing passenger to adjust. Hands tightened around poles, feet shifted. A few startled breaths escaped before the motion settled again. For the elderly woman it was different. Her grip slipped for just a fraction of a second. Not enough for anyone distracted to notice, enough for her body to sway sharply to one side. One of the grocery bags swung outward, the weight pulling her off center. Her foot slid forward as she tried to recover balance, momentarily lost. A quiet gasp rippled through the aisle. She caught herself before she fell, fingers clawing back onto the pole, but the effort drained what little reserve she had left. Her shoulders sagged. Her breathing turned shallow, faster now, no longer hidden. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin pale beneath the lines of age. This time, someone moved. A woman in blue medical scrubs rose quickly from her seat a few rows away. She was calm, practiced the kind of calm that came from experience. She stepped into the aisle and placed one steady hand on the elderly woman's arm, the other supporting her back. "Easy," she said gently. "I've got you." The elderly woman nodded, lips pressed together, trying to regain control. "I'm all right," she murmured, though the words sounded weaker than she intended. Her knees trembled slightly now, the effort of staying upright no longer disguised. The medic studied her face closely, the pallor, the shallow breathing, the way her eyes blinked slowly as if fighting dizziness. She did not raise her voice, but her tone sharpened with concern. "You need to sit," she said. "Right now." She looked toward the blocked seat. The young man noticed the movement at last. He turned his head, irritation flashing across his face as his music continued to pulse faintly through his headphones. He took in the scene quickly, eyes moving from the medic's uniform to the elderly woman's unsteady stance. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across his expression. Then it vanished. The medic addressed him directly, her voice firm but controlled. "Sir, she said she's close to fainting. You need to move your feet so she can sit." The bus fell silent again. The young man scoffed. He removed one ear cup, just enough to be heard his smirk returning, as if on instinct. "That's not my problem," he said flatly. The words landed hard. The medic stared at him, disbelief crossing her face. She could fall, she said. She could get hurt. He shrugged. Then she should have planned better. The phrase hung in the air, heavier than before. Not my problem. It was no longer about courtesy. It was no longer about respect. It was about the refusal to acknowledge another person's humanity when inconvenience stood in the way. The elderly woman lowered her head, eyes closing briefly as if the room had tilted again. The medic tightened her grip, steadying her fully now. Around them, the bus felt frozen. Keanu remained seated, his gaze fixed on the scene. His posture was unchanged, but something deeper had shifted. The line had been crossed. The stakes were no longer social. They were physical, real. And the words, "not my problem," echoed through the bus, no longer a defense, but a declaration of who the young man had chosen to be. The medic did not move away. She kept one arm firmly around the elderly woman's back, the other braced along her forearm, her stance wide and grounded to absorb any sudden shift of the bus. Years of training showed in the way she positioned herself, placing her own body between risk and harm without hesitation. "You're pale," the medic said quietly. Her voice meant only for the woman now. "Focus on me." Slow breaths. The elderly woman nodded faintly. Her lips parted as she tried to inhale more deeply, but the breath came uneven. Her grocery bags hung forgotten at her side, the paper creased and sagging, their weight no longer the biggest burden she carried. The medic looked up again, this time more sharply. "Sir," she said, turning back toward the young man, "this is no longer optional. She needs to sit before she collapses." The young man rolled his eyes. He pulled the second ear cup off fully now, not out of concern but irritation. "You people are acting like I pushed her," he said. "I didn't do anything." A few passengers murmured in disbelief. Someone whispered, "Unreal." Another passenger shook their head openly now. The medic held his gaze. "You're blocking a seat while someone is medically unstable. That is doing something." He laughed once, short and dismissive. "Look, I paid full fare. I'm not responsible for other people's health. That's your job, right?" He nodded toward her scrubs. "Handle it." The words drew a sharp intake of breath from several passengers. The elderly woman flinched slightly, not from the volume, but from the cruelty behind it. She closed her eyes again, shoulders dipping as if the strength to stay present was slipping away. The medic adjusted her hold, tightening just enough to keep her upright. Keanu watched the exchange carefully. He saw how the young man reframed everything. How he reduced a human being to an inconvenience. How he hid behind rules and payments and technicalities to excuse indifference. He recognized the pattern immediately. He had seen it in boardrooms, on sets, in quiet rooms where power was discussed without conscience. The medic's voice remained steady, but her patience was thinning. "If she falls, she could break a bone," she said. "At her age, that can be life-changing. Do you understand that?" The young man shrugged again, his posture loose, his legs still stretched wide. "Not my problem," he repeated slower this time, savoring the phrase as if it proved something. That was when the bus truly went still. No shifting, no whispers. Even the music leaking from his headphones felt muted now, drowned out by the weight of what he had said. The phrase echoed not just in sound, but in meaning. Not my problem. It was no longer a refusal. It was a statement of identity. The medic looked away from him at last, focusing fully on the woman she was holding. "We're going to get you through this," she said softly. "Just stay with me." The elderly woman nodded weakly, trusting the steady presence beside her. Keanu remained seated silent, his restraint unbroken. But inside him the calculation had ended. The moment had changed, and everyone on the bus could feel it. The bus lurched again, not as sharply as before, but enough to test what little balance the elderly woman still had. Her knees buckled slightly this time, and a quiet sound escaped her throat before she could stop it. The medic tightened her hold instantly, shifting her weight to keep them both upright. "That's it," the medic said firmly. "You're done standing." She looked around, searching for any open seat, any space at all. There was none. Only the same blocked seat, the same pair of shoes stretched across it, the same young man watching with detached annoyance. The medic turned back to him, her voice losing its softness. "This is dangerous," she said. "She is not just tired. She is at risk." The young man leaned back, crossing his arms, now his posture defensive and smug at the same time. "I didn't make her stand," he said. "You're acting like I owe her something." The medic stared at him, disbelief hardening into anger. "You owe her basic decency." He laughed quietly. "That's your opinion." The phrase returned again, uninvited and unmistakable. "Not my problem." This time it did not sound casual. It sounded final. The bus felt smaller now, the air thick and close. Passengers who had stayed silent earlier now watched openly, their faces reflecting a shared realization. This was no longer about a seat. It was about who someone chose to be when another person's safety depended on them. The elderly woman's head tipped forward slightly, her chin dipping toward her chest. The medic lifted her gently and keeping her eyes level. "Stay with me," she said again. "Look at me." Keanu watched the woman's strength slipping, watched the medic's calm begin to strain, watched the young man remain unmoved. He did not stand, not yet. But his gaze was steady now, fixed on the moment as it crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Manners had left the conversation. Courtesy had been dismissed. What remained was character exposed without disguise. The bus rolled on, and everyone aboard understood, whether they wanted to or not, that what happened next would define this moment forever. Keanu stood. There was no sudden movement, no sharp sound of a seat snapping back, no raised shoulders or clenched fists. He simply rose from where he had been sitting, one hand resting briefly on the seat in front of him. For balance, his boots planting firmly on the floor. The effect was immediate. The bus did not stop moving, but everything inside it did. Conversations cut off mid-thought, a phone lowered slowly. The medic glanced over her shoulder. Even the hum of the engine seemed quieter, as if the space itself had become aware of the shift. Keanu did not rush forward. He took one step into the aisle and stopped. His posture was relaxed, grounded, unthreatening. But there was a stillness to him now that drew attention without asking for it. The young man noticed him at last. He turned fully in his seat. Irritation already on his face, eyes scanning Keanu from head to toe. He saw the worn jacket, the scuffed boots, the calm expression. Nothing about Keanu fit the image of someone he felt obligated to respect. A laugh escaped him, short and dismissive. "What is this?" he said loudly, another lecture. He shook his head, smirking. "You people really don't know when to quit." A few passengers stiffened. Someone whispered Keanu's name under their breath, uncertain. Most still did not recognize him. They only sensed that something different had entered the space. Keanu did not react to the mockery. He looked first at the elderly woman, still supported by the medic, her breathing shallow, her strength visibly fading. Then he looked at the young man. His gaze was steady, not angry, not cold, clear. "You heard her ask," Keanu said. His voice was calm, low, measured. It did not compete with the music or the tension. It did not need to. The young man scoffed, and he replied, "She asked. I said no." Keanu nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing with it. "You chose not to move?" he said. "That's true." The young man leaned back, arms spreading slightly as if inviting an argument. "Exactly. My choice." Keanu took one more step forward, stopping well short of the seat. He did not invade the young man's space. He did not loom. He simply stood where he was present. And this, Keanu said, gesturing subtly toward the woman and the medic, is the result of that choice. The bus was completely silent now. No one coughed. No one shifted. Every eye followed the exchange, aware that this was no longer about rules or fares or opinions. It was about accountability. The young man snorted. "You think standing there makes you important?" he said. "You think I care what you think?" Keanu's expression did not change. "I'm not asking you to care what I think," he said. "I'm asking you to look at what you're doing." The words landed softly. And because they were soft, they carried farther than shouting ever could. The young man rolled his shoulders unimpressed, as if shaking off something annoying. "Look around," he said, spreading his hands toward the bus. "Everyone's got an opinion. That doesn't mean I have to listen." Keanu did not respond right away. He let the silence do what noise never could. It pressed in gently, forcing attention instead of demanding it. The medic remained steady beside the elderly woman, one arm firm around her back. The woman's eyes were half-lidded now, her breathing shallow, but controlled her weight, leaning more heavily against the support she was being given. Keanu spoke again, his voice unchanged. "No one is telling you what kind of person you are," he said. "You're showing that yourself." A few passengers shifted in their seats. The words were not loud, but they landed with weight. They did not accuse. They observed. The young man laughed again, though this time it sounded thinner. "You're really doing this," he said. "You're really trying to make this some big moral thing." Keanu nodded slightly. "It already is." That answer gave the young man pause just for a moment. His eyes narrowed, searching Keanu's face for anger, for ego, for anything he could push against. He found none of it. "So what?" the young man said finally. "You want me to feel bad?" "You want a speech? I told you already. I paid. I'm sitting. End of story." Keanu's gaze flicked briefly to the woman again, then back. "It's not about the seat," he said. "It hasn't been for a while." The bus felt even smaller now, the air close as every breath shared. People leaned forward without realizing it, drawn in by the calm certainty in Keanu's voice. The young man scoffed. "You're acting like she's dying." "She might fall," Keanu replied. "And if she does, you'll still be sitting there saying it wasn't your problem." That landed harder. A murmur rippled through the bus, not loud enough to interrupt, but enough to confirm that others felt it too. The medic's jaw tightened. The elderly woman's fingers twitched weakly against the pole. The young man shifted in his seat, irritation giving way to something closer to defensiveness. "I didn't push her," he said again. "I didn't touch her." Keanu's tone remained steady. "You don't have to push someone to put them in danger," he said. "Sometimes all it takes is refusing to move." The young man opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around as if expecting someone to back him up. No one did. Keanu took a breath, slow and even. "You keep saying it's not your problem," he said. "That's true. It's your choice." He paused, letting the words settle. "But choices don't disappear just because we don't like being reminded of them." The bus remained silent, and for the first time since Keanu had stood, the young man did not immediately have a response. The young man shifted again, irritation flickering beneath his confidence. He glanced around the bus, scanning faces, searching for agreement, for reinforcement, for anything that might return control to him. What he found instead was silence. Not empty silence, judgmental silence, the kind that no longer felt neutral. He scoffed, forcing a laugh. "You're all acting like I committed some kind of crime," he said. "This is ridiculous." Keanu did not raise his voice. No one said that he replied evenly. "What's happening is simpler than that." The young man narrowed his eyes. "Oh yeah, enlighten me." Keanu did not take the bait. He gestured slightly toward the aisle, toward the medic holding the elderly woman upright, toward the quiet tension wrapping the bus. "This isn't about rules," he said, "and it's not about what you paid." He paused, allowing the young man to hear every word. "It's about whether you're willing to make room when someone else can't stand anymore." The young man snorted. "And you think standing there makes you some kind of authority?" Keanu met his gaze calmly. "No," he said. "It just means I'm not pretending this isn't happening." That answer landed differently. A woman near the front nodded without realizing she had done it. A man across the aisle straightened slightly as if the words had reached him too. Even the medic glanced toward Keanu. Briefly, gratitude flickering across her face before she returned her focus to the woman she was supporting. The young man felt the shift. His posture stiffened. "You don't know me," he said. "You don't know what I've got going on." Keanu nodded once. "That's true," he said. "And I don't need to?" The young man frowned. "Then why are you talking like you do?" "Because I can see what's happening," Keanu replied, "and so can everyone else." The bus felt impossibly quiet now. The engine hummed beneath the floor, steady and indifferent, but inside every breath felt measured. The young man glanced down at his stretched legs, then back up, annoyance flashing across his face again. "You want me to move," he said. "Just say it." Keanu shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I want you to understand why you should." The young man laughed sharply. "That's not your job." Keanu's expression did not change. "It is when silence stops being harmless." The words hung in the air. The elderly woman shifted weakly, her head dipping forward before the medic lifted her gently again. "Stay with me," the medic whispered. "You're okay." Keanu watched the moment closely, then returned his gaze to the young man. "This doesn't end when the bus stops," he said. "It ends when you decide what kind of person you are, when no one forces you to do the right thing." The young man's mouth opened ready, with another dismissal, another excuse. But nothing came out. For the first time since he had stretched his legs across that seat, the space around him felt smaller. Not because anyone threatened him, not because anyone raised their voice, but because calm had cornered him, and the choice he had been avoiding was now standing directly in front of him. The silence pressed in on the young man harder than any accusation could have. For a moment he simply stared at Keanu, as if waiting for the calm to crack, for anger to surface, for something he could push against. When it did not, his jaw tightened, his confidence shaken, but not gone twisted into something sharper. "You think you're clever," he said, finally, voice rising. "Standing there acting all calm, like you've got some kind of moral high ground." He laughed louder this time, forcing the sound into the space. "You know what happens when people like you tell people like me what to do." No one answered. He took the silence as permission. "They get sued," he said. "They lose their jobs. They get dragged through the mud because they don't know who they're dealing with." A few passengers stiffened. Someone near the back inhaled sharply. The medic did not look away from the elderly woman, but her grip tightened. The young man leaned forward in his seat, eyes locked on Keanu now. "My father is a very powerful man," he said, emphasizing each word. "He knows people, important people. Just one phone call and this whole situation flips." He gestured around the bus with a sharp motion of his hand. "This driver, this transit company, you, all of you." The threat hung in the air, familiar and ugly. Keanu did not react. He did not roll his eyes. He did not scoff. He did not interrupt. He let the young man finish, let the words land exactly as they were meant to. The young man mistook the stillness for uncertainty. "That's how the world works," he continued, emboldened. "Not this fake kindness nonsense. Power, connections, that's what matters." He shook his head, smirking again. "You think giving up a seat makes you a good person? It just makes you weak." The elderly woman's head dipped lower now, not in shame, but in weariness that reached far beyond this bus ride. The medic adjusted her stance again, bracing as the woman's weight leaned heavier. Keanu finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Your father isn't here," he said. The young man blinked, caught off guard. "And neither is his power," Keanu continued. "What's here is you. What's here is her. And what's happening is happening because of choices you're making right now." The bus was completely silent. Even the young man's music had stopped, forgotten, one ear cup hanging loose around his neck. "You don't get to borrow someone else's importance," Keanu said. "Not in a moment like this." The young man's face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "You have no idea who my family is." Keanu nodded once. "That may be true," he said, "but it doesn't change what's happening." He gestured again subtly toward the medic and the woman. "She's unsteady. She could fall. And you're still sitting there telling yourself this is about winning." The young man stood abruptly, anger breaking through at last. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he demanded. "You think there won't be consequences?" Keanu did not step back. He did not step forward either. He held his ground, eyes steady, voice even. "There already are," he said. The words did not sound like a threat. They sounded like a fact. The bus remained frozen, every passenger aware that the argument had crossed into something irreversible. This was no longer about seats or manners or even respect. It was about false power colliding with truth. and everyone knew what came next would not be undone. The young man's chest rose and fell faster now, his anger feeding on itself. He stood fully in the aisle, shoulders squared, trying to reclaim the dominance he felt slipping away. The movement alone sent a ripple of tension through the bus. A mother instinctively pulled her child closer. Someone near the back leaned away, creating space without realizing why. "You think this ends well for you?" the young man said, his voice sharp, almost shaking. "You think people like me just walk away from being embarrassed?" He pointed at Keanu, finger trembling slightly. "My dad won't forget this. He won't forget you, or any of you." He glanced around again, daring anyone to meet his eyes. "You have no idea how fast things can get ugly when the wrong person is crossed." Still, no one spoke. Keanu remained where he was, grounded, unmoved by the volume or the threats. He did not answer immediately. He let the young man hear his own words echo in the silence they created. Then he spoke. "Threats don't make you powerful," Keanu said quietly. "They just show how afraid you are of being held accountable." The young man scoffed, but the sound lacked confidence now. Accountable for what he snapped, for sitting down, for pretending this isn't happening? Keanu replied. He nodded toward the elderly woman who sagged slightly against the medic's support. Eyes closed, now breath shallow but steady. For telling yourself that money and connections erase what's right in front of you. The young man opened his mouth, then stopped. His eyes darted briefly toward the woman, then away again, as if looking at her too long might force him to acknowledge something he was determined to avoid. "This isn't a courtroom," he said finally. "You don't get to judge me." Keanu's tone did not change. "I'm not judging you," he said. "I'm watching you decide." The bus felt impossibly quiet. Even the engine seemed distant, muffled by the weight of the moment. Every passenger understood that something fundamental was unfolding. Not a debate, a reveal. The young man's jaw tightened. "I don't owe anyone anything," he said again, but the words sounded rehearsed, now thinner than before. "My life, my rules." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's true," he said. "And this is one of those moments that follows you whether you want it to or not." The young man laughed sharply, but there was no humor left in it. "You think this matters?" Keanu met his eyes. "You're the one still standing here arguing," he said. "So, yes, it matters." The bus remained silent. No one moved to intervene. No one reached for a phone. No one broke the spell. They all felt it. The confrontation had reached its edge. There would be no graceful retreat now. The next choice would not be about words. It would be about action. The young man's breathing was loud now, sharp, uneven. The kind that came not from exertion, but from pride pushed into a corner. He took one step closer to Keanu. The bus felt impossibly small. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the medic froze for a brief second, tightening her hold on the elderly woman as if bracing for something she could not name. "You don't get to talk to me like that," the young man said, his voice tight with anger. "You don't know who you are dealing with." Keanu did not answer. He did not raise his hands. He did not square his shoulders. He stood exactly as he had before. Feet planted, posture balanced, eyes steady. He was not preparing to fight. He was preparing to remain unmoved. The young man mistook that stillness for weakness. With a sudden burst of reckless confidence, he shoved Keanu hard in the chest. The motion was fast and careless, fueled by frustration rather than strength. It was the kind of shove meant to shock, to assert dominance, to force a reaction. A shove delivered by someone who had never been challenged and expected the world to move when he pushed it. Keanu did not stumble. His body absorbed the force without panic, without tension. He shifted his weight just enough to stay centered, boots gripping the floor, balance never breaking. There was no dramatic resistance, no visible strain, just control. The young man's hand remained against Keanu's chest for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, as if surprised that nothing had happened. That was when Keanu moved. Not forward, not aggressively. He turned slightly, guiding the momentum past him rather than meeting it head on. One hand came up, not striking, not grabbing with force, but redirecting the young man's arm downward. The movement was precise and economical, a correction rather than an attack. The shove collapsed under its own weight. The young man's balance, built entirely on expectation rather than control, vanished. His foot slipped back. His center shifted too far. His confidence betrayed him. He stumbled sideways. His shoulder struck the metal pole with a dull clang loud enough to echo. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the floor and sliding beneath a seat. His headphones tore free from his ears, one side snapping loose, the music cutting off mid-beat. Silence rushed in. The young man fell hard onto the aisle, landing awkwardly on his hip, and the impact stealing the breath from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, stunned, eyes wide, trying to understand how quickly everything had changed. The bus gasped, not screams, not panic, just a sharp, collective intake of breath as reality snapped into place. The power dynamic reversed in an instant, not through violence, but through exposure. Keanu stepped back half a pace. He did not loom over the young man. He did not raise his voice. He did not follow him to the floor. He simply stood where he was, calm as ever, as if the moment required nothing more from him. The medic tightened her hold on the elderly woman again, eyes flicking between Keanu and the fallen young man. Passengers pressed back against their seats, some covering their mouths, others staring openly, now unable to look away. The young man pushed himself up on one elbow, face burning shock, giving way to humiliation. His eyes darted around the bus, searching for support, for outrage, for anything that would restore what he had lost. He found none. The music was gone. The noise was gone. The arrogance that had filled the space moments ago had collapsed into silence. Keanu's voice remained low and steady when he finally spoke. "That didn't need to happen," he said. And in the stillness that followed, everyone understood something clearly for the first time. This was no longer about strength. It was about restraint. The young man remained on the floor, one knee bent awkwardly beneath him. One hand pressed flat against the bus aisle as he tried to steady himself. His breathing came in short bursts now, not from pain, but from disbelief. The world had not reacted the way he expected it to. He looked up at Keanu, eyes wide, searching for anger, for triumph, for threat. He found none. Keanu stood a step back, hands relaxed at his sides, expression unchanged. There was no follow-through, no challenge, no satisfaction. Just distance. Around them, the bus stayed frozen. No one rushed forward. No one shouted. Even the medic, still holding the elderly woman upright, did not move. Her focus remained on the woman's breathing, but her awareness took in everything else. The young man scrambled to sit upright, embarrassment flooding his face. "You touched me!" he blurted out, voice sharp and defensive. "You can't do that!" Keanu did not respond immediately. He looked down, not at the young man's face, but at the place where the shove had begun, at the space where the choice had been made. "You pushed first," Keanu said calmly. The words were not accusatory, they were factual. The young man opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. His phone lay a few feet away, screen dark, reflecting only the overhead lights and the stillness of the moment. One ear cup of his headphones dangled uselessly against his shoulder, the music gone, the bubble broken. The bus felt different now, not tense, exposed. Passengers who had avoided eye contact earlier now watched openly. A man near the window shook his head slowly. A woman across the aisle pressed her lips together, relief and shock mixing in her expression. The mother tightened her grip on her child's hand, whispering something quietly, urgently. The young man pushed himself to his feet. Unsteady. Pride bruised deeper than his body. He looked around again, expecting outrage, threats, chaos. Instead, he found judgment. Not loud, not cruel, just present. Keanu did not step closer. He did not block him. He simply stood between the young man and the rest of the bus, not as an obstacle, but as a reminder. The elderly woman shifted slightly, supported firmly, now her breathing steadier than before. The medic adjusted her stance again, preparing to move her as soon as space allowed. The power on the bus had changed hands not because someone was stronger, but because someone had lost control. And everyone aboard understood that what happened next would not be undone by shouting or status or excuses. The moment had passed. The truth remained. The young man's humiliation curdled into panic. He pushed himself fully upright, movements sharp and erratic, now eyes flicking from face to face, as if the bus itself had turned against him. The silence no longer felt neutral. It felt heavy, watching. "This isn't over," he snapped, voice strained. "You don't get to put your hands on me and just stand there like nothing happened." Keanu remained still. The young man took a step forward, then another, his balance. Uncertain, his anger doing the work his confidence could no longer support. He was no longer trying to prove strength. He was trying to reclaim control. "You think you embarrassed me," he said, words tumbling out too fast. "I'll show you embarrassed." He lunged. It was clumsy, desperate, all momentum and no precision. The kind of movement made by someone who had never learned the difference between force and control. Keanu moved. Not forward, not violently. He stepped just enough to the side to let the young man's weight pass where he had been standing. One hand guided the arm that reached for him. The other found the young man's shoulder, not gripping, not striking, simply redirecting. The young man's feet left him again. This time he did not crash. Keanu lowered him. The motion was smooth and deliberate, the kind that removed options without adding pain. The young man was guided down onto the aisle floor, face turned away from hard edges, his arm controlled in a position that stopped further movement without forcing it. He struggled instinctively, anger flashing hot and bright. "Let go," he hissed. "Get off me." Keanu adjusted slightly, applying only enough pressure to keep him still. No more, no less. "Stop," Keanu said quietly. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. The young man froze breath, hitching as he realized something he had not expected. Fighting only made it worse. Every movement met calm resistance. Every surge of panic found nowhere to go. Around them, the bus remained silent. No cheers, no gasps, no chaos. The medic watched closely. Her focus split between the woman she supported and the situation unfolding on the floor. She saw what mattered: control, safety, restraint. Keanu spoke again, his voice low, meant only for the young man to hear, but clear enough that others caught pieces of it anyway. "This didn't happen because of me," he said, "and it didn't happen because you stood up." The young man swallowed hard, chest pressed to the floor, his pride stripped away layer by layer. "You attacked me," he muttered weakly. Keanu shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You lost control." The words landed with weight. Keanu's grip remained steady, careful. He was not pinning the young man to prove dominance. He was holding him there to stop him from hurting anyone else, including himself. "You keep talking about power," Keanu continued, "about who your father is, about what you think you're owed." The young man went still, listening despite himself. "But the person who was harmed today," Keanu said quietly, "wasn't me." He paused, letting the truth settle. "It was the woman you decided didn't matter." The young man's breathing slowed, confusion mixing with dawning realization. The fight drained out of him, replaced by something colder and harder to face. Shame. Keanu felt it immediately. He eased the pressure just enough to let the young man breathe more freely without giving him room to move. "This ends now," Keanu said, "not because you lost, but because you've already done enough damage." The bus remained still, and for the first time since the elderly woman had stepped aboard, the danger had truly passed. The young man lay still now, the fight draining out of him in quiet stages. His chest rose and fell more evenly, the sharp edge of panic dulling into something heavier, something harder to escape. The realization that this moment could not be reversed. Keanu kept his position balanced and controlled, making no effort to rush the ending. He waited until the young man's muscles loosened, until resistance turned into resignation. Only then did he shift slightly, easing the pressure just enough to signal that the struggle was over. "You're not trapped," Keanu said calmly. "You're being held accountable." The young man swallowed, his voice coming out hoarse. You think this makes you better than me? Keanu did not answer immediately. He glanced toward the aisle, toward the medic and the elderly woman. The woman was seated now, finally guided gently into place by the medic. Her grocery bags rested at her feet. Her hands lay folded in her lap, trembling faintly, but her breathing had steadied. Color had begun to return to her face. Only then did Keanu speak again. This isn't about being better, he said. It's about being responsible when someone else can't protect themselves. The young man's jaw tightened. You humiliated me. Keanu shook his head slightly. No, he said. You did that yourself. The words were quiet, unavoidable. The young man stared at the floor, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface beneath him. For the first time, there was no argument ready, no threat, no name to invoke, just the weight of what had happened. Around them, the bus remained silent, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt tense. It felt resolved. Passengers breathed again. Someone shifted in their seat. The engine hummed steadily beneath the floor. Keanu adjusted once more, then slowly released the hold, rising to his feet without urgency. He stepped back, creating space instead of claiming it. Stay where you are, he said, not as a command, but as guidance. Help is coming. The young man did not move. He sat up slowly, legs drawn in shoulders, slumped. The arrogance that had filled the bus earlier was gone, replaced by a fragile stillness that did not know what came next. Keanu stood between him and the rest of the aisle, not blocking, not guarding, simply present. The medic met Keanu's eyes briefly and nodded a silent acknowledgement of restraint done right. The elderly woman looked up, then her gaze meeting Keanu's for the first time. There was no fear in her eyes, no anger, only understanding. Keanu inclined his head slightly in return. No words were needed. The consequence had already arrived. Keanu stepped away from the aisle first. There was no lingering stance, no need to hold attention. The moment had passed, and he allowed it to pass fully. He turned toward the elderly woman, his movements unhurried, his presence shifting from containment to care. He stopped beside her, careful not to startle her, and lowered himself slightly so his eyes were level with hers. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle. "May I help you sit here?" he asked. It was a question, not an assumption. The woman looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face before softening into relief. She nodded once. "Yes," she said quietly. "Thank you." Keanu placed one hand lightly at her elbow, the other open, offering support without gripping. He waited until she was ready, until her feet were positioned, until her balance felt steady enough to shift. Together they moved the final step. She sat. The seat accepted her weight, and with it the tension she had been carrying. Her shoulders lowered visibly, her hands relaxed in her lap. She closed her eyes briefly, not from weakness, but from relief that finally had permission to exist. The medic knelt beside her, immediately checking her pulse with practiced ease. She watched the woman's breathing slow, watched the color return gradually to her cheeks. "That's better," the medic said softly. "Just stay still for a moment." The woman nodded again, lips parting in a faint smile that barely lifted the corners of her mouth. Keanu crouched briefly to place her grocery bags within reach, careful not to crowd her space. "Take your time," he said. "You're safe." Those words did something no argument had managed to do. They released the bus. A breath moved through the space, almost audible. Shoulders loosened, backs pressed against seats. Someone near the back exhaled shakily, as if they had been holding air in their lungs for far too long. A few soft claps broke the silence. Not applause, not celebration, just acknowledgement. Others did not clap. They looked down instead, at their hands, at the floor, at the space where they had chosen stillness when movement was needed. Shame settled quietly among them, not as punishment, but as recognition. Keanu stood again, stepping back into the aisle, deliberately removing himself from the center. He did not accept the attention. He did not seek it. He simply made room. The medic stood as well, satisfied now. "Her vitals are stabilizing," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "She should be fine, as long as she stays seated." The woman opened her eyes and looked at Keanu once more. I didn't want to make trouble, she said, her voice thin but steady. Keanu shook his head gently. You didn't, he said. You asked for what you needed. That mattered. The bus began to feel like a bus again. Not a stage, not a battleground, just a moving space filled with people, each returning slowly to themselves. The young man remained seated on the floor, silent now, no one looking at him the way they had before. His presence felt smaller, diminished not by force but by clarity. Keanu did not look at him. His attention remained where it belonged, with the woman who finally had her seat back, and with the quiet restoration of dignity that followed. The elderly woman rested back against the seat, her breathing evening out with each passing second. The medic remained beside her, one hand lightly on her wrist, counting silently, watching closely. After a moment, she nodded to herself, reassured. Pulse is steady, the medic said softly. You're doing well. The woman let out a small breath she had been holding for longer than she realized. Her shoulders eased further, and she opened her eyes again, this time with more clarity. She looked around the bus, taking in the faces that had watched her stand for so long. Some met her gaze, others looked away. A man near the window cleared his throat and shifted in his seat, his face tight with discomfort. A woman across the aisle pressed her lips together, eyes damp as if replaying the moment when she might have spoken up and did not. A teenage girl stared at the floor, twisting the strap of her backpack around her fingers. No one spoke. Keanu stepped back another pace, giving the woman space, giving everyone space. He leaned lightly against a pole, no longer central, no longer necessary, his role complete. The bus rolled forward, the engine's steady hum filling the quiet left behind. The city outside resumed its motion. Pedestrians crossed streets, cars merged and separated. Life continued, unaware of the small but significant shift that had taken place inside this moving box of strangers. A few more soft claps sounded, hesitant, unsure, then stopped on their own. No one joined them loudly. It was not that kind of moment. The woman adjusted her coat and glanced down at her hands, then back up at Keanu. I didn't think anyone would notice, she said quietly. People usually don't. Keanu met her eyes briefly. Some do, he said. It just takes one. She nodded, absorbing that, then looked away again, resting. The medic stood and addressed the driver, keeping her voice low. She's stable now, she said. We'll keep an eye on her, but she's okay to stay on board. The driver nodded, relief visible even from a distance. He returned his focus to the road. The young man remained where he was, sitting stiffly near the aisle, eyes fixed on the floor. No one spoke to him. No one pointed. The absence of attention felt heavier than confrontation ever had. Keanu did not look back. He remained still present, allowing the bus to return to its rhythm without forcing closure. The moment had not been about victory. It had been about restoration. As the bus approached the next stop, sunlight shifted through the windows, washing over the seats, the metal poles, the tired faces. The elderly woman closed her eyes again, not from weakness this time, but from comfort. For the first time since she boarded, she was simply a passenger again. And for everyone else, the ride continued quieter now, carrying with it the weight of a lesson learned too late, but learned all the same. The young man sat very still, his back pressed against the side of a seat, knees drawn and slightly hands resting on his thighs, as if they no longer knew what to do. The bus had returned to motion, but inside him something had stopped. He lifted his head slowly, eyes drifting upward without intention. That was when he saw it. The small dome fixed to the ceiling near the center of the bus, the faint red light blinking steadily. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just there, watching, recording. His breath caught. He stared at it longer than necessary, as if hoping it might blink off or that he had misunderstood what he was seeing. The red light blinked again, and again. Everything replayed in his mind at once. The refusal, the words, the shove, the fall, the second lunge, the way the bus had gone silent. He swallowed hard. For the first time since the bus doors had closed behind him, he understood something clearly. This moment did not belong to him anymore. He could not edit it, could not reframe it, could not call anyone to make it disappear. There would be no version where he was misunderstood, no explanation polished enough to erase what the camera had already captured. The seat, the woman, the medic, Keanu standing calmly in the aisle. Every choice he had made was no longer private. His shoulders slumped further. Around him, passengers noticed the change. Not the camera itself at first, but the way the young man's posture collapsed inward, the way his jaw clenched, then loosened, the way his eyes lost their sharp edge and became unfocused as if he were finally seeing the situation from the outside. The driver's voice came through the speaker, then steady and composed. "Attention, everyone," he said. "We'll be meeting transit security at the end of the line. No alarm, no accusation, just procedure." The words settled heavily over the bus. The young man flinched as if struck, his head snapping forward. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to threaten with, nothing left to argue. The driver continued, his tone unchanged. "Please remain seated until we arrive. Thank you for your patience." The announcement ended. The bus rolled on. The young man lowered his gaze to the floor, staring at the scuffed rubber beneath his shoes. His reflection stared back faintly in the dark surface of his phone screen, still lying face down beside him. He did not reach for it. He did not reach for anything. This was the moment his confidence finally left him. Not taken, not stripped away by force, simply abandoned him when it could no longer protect him from consequence. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly, jaw tight. Not in anger now, in something closer to fear, not of punishment, but of being seen clearly for the first time. Keanu remained standing near the pole, quiet and unobtrusive. He did not look at the camera. He did not look at the young man. He looked forward, allowing the process to unfold without interference. The elderly woman sat calmly now, breathing, steady, hands folded in her lap. The medic remained nearby, alert but at ease. The bus moved toward its destination, and the young man sat in silence, understanding at last that power borrowed from someone else vanished the moment reality arrived. The blinking light kept its rhythm, indifferent to pleading or pride. With every pulse, the young man felt time locking into place, sealing what had already happened. He shifted on the seat, then stopped, realizing movement would not change the record. The bus carried him forward, but his mind stayed behind, replaying moments he wished he could pause. Around him, passengers returned to small motions. A jacket zipped, a backpack adjusted, a sigh released. No one spoke to him. No one needed to. The absence of attention pressed harder than shouting ever had. He had wanted an audience. Now he had witnesses. The driver's hands stayed steady on the wheel. The road hummed beneath the tires. Another block passed. Another light changed. Routine continued, and that normalcy stripped the situation of drama, leaving only truth. The young man's shoulders sagged further, as if gravity had increased just for him. He thought of calling someone, anyone. Then he saw the camera again and understood how thin that idea was. Calls could not undo footage. Names could not erase time. His father's voice, once a shield, felt distant and unhelpful. It could not step onto this bus. It could not choose for him. Across the aisle, the elderly woman adjusted her coat and breathed easily now. The medic checked once more and smiled faintly. Relief settled where fear had been. That contrast cut deeper than any reprimand. The harm he had caused was clear because the healing was visible. Keanu remained quiet, leaning lightly against the pole, gaze forward. There was no judgment in his posture, no victory, just a calm refusal to make the moment about himself. That restraint made the lesson sharper. Nothing was being taken from the young man now. Everything was being shown. The bus slowed as it approached a larger intersection. The driver spoke again, gentle and firm. "We'll be a few minutes out," he said. "Security will meet us at the terminal." The young man nodded without lifting his head, acknowledging words meant for everyone and for him alone. He drew his knees in and folded his hands, a posture smaller than before. The confidence that had filled the aisle earlier had collapsed inward, leaving only awareness. He breathed out slowly and sat with it. The record, the witnesses, the choice he had made. For the first time, he did not argue with the truth. He waited. outside the city kept moving, unaware of the reckoning inside the bus. Stores opened, doors closed, horns sounded, schedules held. Inside, the young man stayed seated, eyes open, now absorbing consequence without defiance. The camera blinked on. The driver drove. The woman rested. Keanu stood. No speeches followed. No cheers rose. The lesson settled quietly, heavy and permanent, carried forward with the route waiting for the next stop. It would not be forgotten, not by those who watched, nor by the one who learned too late, as the bus rolled on toward daylight, accountability, and change. At last. The bus slowed as it approached the end of the route. Outside the windows, the scenery changed subtly. Fewer storefronts, more open space, a wide sidewalk bordered by trees whose leaves shifted gently in the breeze. Ahead, a low building came into view, brick and glass banners hanging near the entrance. The driver eased the bus to a stop. "Community center," he announced calmly. "End of the line!" The doors opened with a soft hiss. For a moment, no one moved. Then a woman wearing a volunteer badge stepped up to the bus doors. She was followed by two others, all dressed neatly. Expressions alert and warm. Their eyes scanned the interior with purpose, not curiosity. They spotted the elderly woman immediately. "There you are," the volunteer said, relief spreading across her face. She climbed the steps without hesitation. "We were worried when you didn't arrive earlier." The elderly woman looked up surprised. "I'm fine," she said gently. "Just took a bit longer today." The volunteer noticed the medic beside her, the settled posture. The grocery bags at her feet. She nodded, understanding without needing explanation. "We're ready for you whenever you are," she said. "Everyone's waiting. Waiting." Passengers leaned forward slightly, confusion rippling through the bus. The volunteer reached out respectfully. "May I help you down?" she asked. The elderly woman nodded. As she rose, supported carefully, the volunteer spoke her name aloud, clear and familiar. A name that carried weight. Heads turned, whispers stirred. This was no random stop. The elderly woman stepped down onto the pavement, greeted by gentle applause from a small group gathered just outside the entrance. Not loud, not performative. Warm, earned. Another volunteer glanced back toward the bus interior. Her gaze settled on Keanu. "Oh," she said, recognition lighting her face. "You're here too." Keanu stepped forward, calm as ever. "I am. We were hoping you'd make it," she said. "She asked if you were coming." The elderly woman turned back, eyes meeting his. A smile touched her face, soft and knowing. "I knew you would," she said quietly. Passengers watched in silence now, the pieces shifting into place. The volunteers guided the elderly woman toward the entrance, careful and unhurried. As she passed beneath the banner, the words became visible. A recognition ceremony. Photos displayed near the doors showed her younger standing beside groups of children. Classrooms, community projects. Decades of quiet work captured in still frames. Inside, rows of chairs waited. The volunteer paused and addressed the group gently. "She's our guest of honor today," she said. "Has been part of this community longer than most of us have been alive." The bus felt smaller again, but this time with awe. Keanu followed a few steps behind, not at her side, not ahead of her, just present. One of the volunteers leaned closer to him as they walked. "She talks about you sometimes," she said softly. "About when you were younger." Keanu smiled faintly. "She taught me more than she knows." The elderly woman glanced back at him, hearing that. "I taught you what you were ready to learn," she said. "You did the rest." They reached the doors together. Behind them on the bus, the young man sat frozen, watching the scene unfold through the open doors. His earlier certainty dissolved completely as understanding replaced it. The woman he had dismissed, the man he had mocked, neither had been what he assumed. The doors closed slowly behind them, and the truth settled in, undeniable and irreversible. This had never been an ordinary bus ride. Inside the community center, the air felt different, softer, purposeful. Rows of chairs faced a small stage dressed simply with flowers and framed photographs. People stood as the elderly woman entered, not out of obligation, but recognition. Applause rose again, steady and sincere, filling the room without overwhelming it. She paused just inside the doorway, taking it in. The faces, the familiar voices calling her name, the quiet gratitude that had been building here long before today. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of being seen. Keanu stayed a step behind her. A volunteer guided her to the front row, a seat marked with a small card bearing her name. As she sat, someone from the stage approached the microphone and spoke warmly about a life spent lifting others, about classrooms that became safe places, about patience practiced daily, about values taught without sermons. As the speaker continued, a photo appeared on a screen behind them. The image was old, faded at the edges. A younger version of the woman stood beside a group of students. Among them was a quiet boy with dark hair, standing slightly apart, eyes attentive. Murmurs moved through the room. Keanu looked at the image and nodded once. The speaker smiled. "Some of you may recognize him," she said gently. "He doesn't talk much about this time in his life, but we know how much it mattered." She turned toward Keanu. She mentored him when no one else was watching. Long before the world knew his name. Keanu stepped forward, then not to the microphone, but to the side of the stage where the woman could see him clearly. Their eyes met. The years between them felt smaller than the space between chairs. "She taught me to slow down," he said quietly, "to notice who needed help before being asked, to understand that strength isn't loud." The room listened. "She never asked for credit," Keanu continued. "She just showed up, every day." The elderly woman smiled, eyes shining. "You were already kind," she said. "You just needed someone to tell you it mattered." Applause filled the room again, fuller now, carrying understanding with it. Outside, through the glass, the bus waited at the curb. Inside it, the young man remained seated, watching through reflections and glare. The ceremony, the names, the photographs, the calm dignity of the woman he had ignored, the quiet authority of the man he had challenged. The story was complete now. The bus doors closed. Inside the community center, the recognition continued. Inside the young man, something else did too. The collapse of borrowed power. The beginning of a lesson he would carry long after the route ended. And Keanu stood beside the woman who had shaped him, not as a hero returning for praise, but as a student honoring his teacher at last. The applause inside the community center did not rise for Keanu. It followed the elderly woman as she moved slowly down the aisle, guided by volunteers who treated her with the care reserved for someone deeply respected. The sound wrapped around her, steady and sincere, not loud with excitement, but full with gratitude. People stood as she passed, some smiling, some wiping at their eyes, many nodding as if greeting a familiar truth they had always known, but never fully said out loud. Keanu walked beside her, just half a step back. He did not wave. He did not acknowledge the room. His hands rested calmly at his sides, his gaze lowered in quiet humility. The applause was not his to accept, and he made no attempt to share it. This moment belonged to her life, her years, her patience, her work done without recognition. She reached the front row and paused. The applause softened naturally, as if the room itself understood when enough had been said. She turned to Keanu briefly and squeezed his hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried decades of shared understanding. "You stayed true," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "Because you showed me how." She sat, settling into the chair marked with her name, shoulders relaxed, eyes bright. On stage, the speaker continued listing moments from her life that had shaped others quietly. Programs she started, children she guided, families she supported when no one else noticed. Each story landed not as praise, but as confirmation. Keanu remained standing to the side. When people glanced toward him, he lowered his eyes, stepping back just enough to keep the focus where it belonged. This was not about arrival or recognition. It was about continuity, about values passed hand to hand, generation to generation. Inside the hall, time seemed to slow. Outside, it moved on. At the end of the bus route, the doors opened again. This time, there were no banners, no applause, no welcome, just the neutral light of a terminal platform and the quiet presence of transit security waiting patiently nearby. The young man stood when instructed. No one grabbed him, no one raised their voice. There was no spectacle. He gathered his jacket slowly, movements careful as if sudden motion might make things worse. His phone was returned to him. His headphones hung uselessly around his neck. The security officers spoke to him calmly, professionally. They explained what would happen next, where he would go, what statements would be taken, what footage existed. He listened. For the first time all day, he did not interrupt. As he stepped off the bus, passengers watched quietly. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with distance. The moment had already moved past him. His role in it was complete. The bus pulled away shortly after carrying the rest of its passengers back into the city, back into their routines. The space he left behind felt lighter, as if something unresolved had finally found its place. Two paths had formed from the same moment. One led into a room filled with gratitude history and earned respect. The other led into quiet accountability, unaccompanied by excuses. Neither involved shouting. Neither required cruelty. They simply reflected the lives that had led there. Inside the community center, the ceremony continued with a calm rhythm that felt earned. Stories unfolded one by one, not exaggerated, not polished for effect. They were spoken plainly, the way truth often is when it does not need decoration. Each story painted another quiet corner of the elderly woman's life moments, where she chose presence over praise and patience over recognition. Keanu remained just off to the side, hands loosely clasped, listening. Every now and then, someone in the audience glanced toward him, recognizing the connection, sensing the lineage of values being honored. When their eyes met his, he offered nothing more than a small nod, redirecting attention back to the woman at the center. He did not belong in the spotlight here, and he knew it. When the woman was invited to stand, the room rose with her. Applause filled the space again, warmer now, layered with understanding. She accepted it quietly, her posture straight, her expression composed. She did not gesture for silence. She did not bask in the moment. She simply stood and allowed gratitude to pass through her the way she had allowed so much else through her life. Keanu watched her with the same respect he had shown on the bus. Outside, the contrast could not have been sharper. The young man stood on the platform under flat fluorescent light, hands in his pockets, shoulders rounded inward. Transit security spoke with him in measured tones, explaining next steps. He nodded when appropriate. He asked one question, then another, his voice lower than before, stripped of the bravado that had once filled the aisle. There were no insults, no raised voices, no audience, just consequence. Paperwork was mentioned. Reports, follow-up. The process moved forward without drama, the way accountability often does when it is real. The young man listened, absorbing the reality that this moment would not vanish when he walked away. He glanced once toward the departing bus, then looked down again. Back inside the community center, the ceremony reached its closing moments. The speaker thanked everyone for coming and reminded them that lives like hers were the backbone of the community, often unseen, but always felt. People began to talk softly, to smile, to approach the woman with thanks and gentle embraces. Keanu stepped forward only when invited, offering his arm when she rose again. They walked together through the room, surrounded by appreciation meant for her. He stayed close, protective, without overshadowing, present, without claiming credit. Two endings unfolded at the same time. One in a room filled with shared memory earned respect and quiet joy. The other on a platform marked by rules records and reflection. No one cheered the young man's removal. No one needed to. The lesson did not require celebration. It required contrast. And that contrast lingered long after the doors closed, long after the bus route ended, carried forward by everyone who witnessed it, each person left to decide which path they would walk when faced with the same choice. The room had emptied slowly. Chairs were folded, flowers were gathered, conversations softened into farewells. The energy that had filled the community center settled into something calm and lasting, like warmth left behind after a fire has burned low. Keanu waited until the last group drifted away before approaching her. She sat near the window now, hands folded in her lap, the late afternoon light resting gently across her face. Without the crowd, without the ceremony, she looked smaller, not diminished, simply human again. Keanu stopped a few steps away, not wanting to intrude. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked up and smiled the same smile she had worn on the bus, the same one that had carried him through years when the world felt uncertain. "For what?" she asked. "For reminding me," he said, "that it still matters." She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way she always had. "You didn't do anything special," she said gently. "You did what you were taught." Keanu nodded. "I know." She reached out and rested her hand over his for a moment. Her touch was light but steady. "And that's the point," she said. "People think strength arrives all at once, that it shows up loud and undeniable, but real strength is practiced quietly, over years, in moments no one applauds." Keanu lowered his gaze, absorbing her words the way he had so many times before. Outside the window, the street was alive again. Another bus pulled up to the curb, brakes hissing softly. Doors opened. People boarded. Life continued. They both watched as a young passenger stood without hesitation, stepping aside to offer their seat to an elderly rider who had just boarded. No one pointed. No one filmed. No one made a sound. It simply happened. The elderly rider smiled and sat. The young passenger stood easily, scrolling through their phone, unaware that they had just echoed a lesson taught long before today. She noticed it too. "There," she said softly. "That's how it works." Keanu followed her gaze, his expression easing. "It spreads," he said. "Only if people choose it," she replied. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the bus pull away, carrying strangers who would never know how close they had come to missing the point. How fragile ordinary moments really were. How much they revealed when tested. Keanu stood and offered his arm. She took it without hesitation. As they walked toward the exit, the world outside felt unchanged and entirely different at the same time. Streets still stretched ahead. Schedules still mattered. But something else lingered beneath it all. A reminder. Respect is not demanded. Power is not inherited. Character is revealed in ordinary moments when no one forces your hand. Before they parted, she looked at him one last time. "Keep doing it," she said, "even when no one's watching." Keanu nodded, especially then. And as the doors closed behind them, the lesson stayed. Not as a speech, not as a warning, but as a quiet question. What would you have done in that moment if you believe real strength is quiet, consistent, and visible? When it matters most, share your thoughts. And if this story moved you, pass it on, because the smallest choices are often the ones that change everything. Outside, the evening light had softened into something gentle and forgiving. The sidewalk glowed faintly under the street lamps, and the noise of the city settled into a steady rhythm of footsteps, engines, and distant voices. Keanu and the woman paused near the entrance, neither of them in a hurry to leave the moment behind. "People think moments like that are rare," she said quietly, her gaze following the flow of pedestrians. "But they happen every day, on buses, in lines, in places where no one expects to be tested." Keanu nodded. "Most people just don't realize they're being tested at all." She smiled at that. "That's why it matters. You don't get time to prepare. You only get the chance to be who you already are." A car passed. Another bus rolled by. Life kept moving, indifferent to lessons learned and lessons missed. Yet beneath the routine, something subtle remained. A sense that the world was shaped less by speeches and more by choices made in passing. Keanu thanked her again before they parted, not with words this time, but with a quiet bow of his head. She returned it pleased not by recognition, but by continuity, the kind that outlasts applause. As Keanu walked away, he blended back into the city the same way he had boarded the bus earlier. No entourage, no attention, just another figure moving through ordinary space, carrying something invisible but steady. Somewhere nearby, another bus stopped. Doors opened. People stepped on and off. A man hesitated, then stepped aside to make room for someone else. A woman reached out to help a stranger steady a bag. Small gestures, unremarkable, powerful. These moments rarely make headlines. They don't come with music or dramatic lighting. They aren't recorded or shared, but they define who we are far more clearly than the stories we tell about ourselves. The question is never whether we will face a moment like that. The question is what we do when it arrives. Do we look away and hope someone else steps in? Do we justify inaction with rules, excuses, or convenience? Or do we choose to act even when it costs us nothing more than comfort? Because respect is not something you demand from others. It is something you show first. Power is not what you inherit, threaten with, or borrow from someone else. It is what you do when no one can force you either way. And character is not revealed in grand speeches or public victories. It is revealed in ordinary moments when the choice is simple and the consequences are real. So ask yourself honestly, if you had been on that bus, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have waited, hoping the moment passed without asking anything of you? Share your thoughts. Share your answer. And if this story stayed with you, pass it on to someone else. Because real strength does not announce itself. It shows up quietly, consistently, and exactly when it matters most.